U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Caine, are holding a press briefing. They're discussing the war on Iran for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. The Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying he visited troops in the Middle East over the weekend and witnessed the military operation against Iran. He touted the effectiveness of American strikes, saying the attacks had damaged the morale of the Iranian military and triggered widespread desertions. He's pressing Tehran to accept Donald Trump's deal to end the war.
The upcoming days will be decisive. Iran knows that, and there's almost nothing they can militarily do about it.
Toni Waterman reports for CNA Live from Washington, D.C. Toni, we're hearing from Pete Hegseth and General Dan Caine there. What details have we heard worth noting at this point?
Well, as you mentioned right there, the defense secretary made this very surprise announcement at the top of this press conference saying that he personally visited the troops in the Middle East over the weekend, claiming that morale among American service members is very high, that they are asking for bigger, faster bombs to carry out their mission, and that they are laser focused on finishing that mission. And he said that while morale among U.S. troops is very high, it seems to be, according to U.S. intelligence, very low among Iranians. Hegseth saying that the next couple of days are going to be very decisive for this war in Iran, but didn't get into the details of what he meant by that, but did say that over the last 24 hours, the U.S. has seen the lowest number of enemy missile launches since this conflict began more than a month ago now, and that the military continues to carry out these very focused attacks on Iranian weapons stockpiles, on their manufacturing capability. The Joint Chief of Staff, the chairman, Dan Caine, saying that more than 11,000 targets have now been hit over this past month. And he said that these B-52 bombers are now doing overland missions for the very first time. Hegseth also saying that regime change in Iran has occurred. This is something we've seen some back and forth on, saying that the new regime that's in charge, if they were wise, that they would cut a deal with the president. The U.S. has sent Iran this 15-point ceasefire deal that Tehran has called excessive and unrealistic. Hegseth also addressing a very little bit right now during a Q&A about the Strait of Hormuz, that strategic waterway that remains closed right now, and essentially saying that this is not really the problem of the United States because the U.S. does not use this strategic waterway in the same capacity that a lot of other countries, particularly Asian countries around the world, do. So he's kind of dodging some of the questions that are being asked right now about when the mission will be over or what the long-term strategic goal is for the Strait of Hormuz, but really trying to say that morale among the U.S. troops is still high. He's still speaking, so I'm sure we'll get some more lines out of that.
All right, the lines that we do have right now, Toni, so back and forth as well on whether the U.S. and Iran are actually talking about reaching a deal. So in this current briefing, Mr. Hegseth saying if Iran is wise, it will cut a deal. The U.S. has options to make any deal at once. But if Iran does not make a deal, the U.S. will continue its war with even greater intensity. From those lines, where are we on any kind of deal between U.S. and Iran to end this war?
Well, Hegseth was asked about these negotiations with Iran, and he said that they are very much ongoing, that they are progressing, but also said that from his perspective, he, at least in the military, will continue to negotiate using bombs. There's been a lot of conflicting messaging, even within the Trump administration, about whether or not these talks are going on, with whom these talks are going on. You had the president yesterday saying that they're speaking to a new, more reasonable regime, saying that the talks are progressing, but the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, kind of threw cold water on that. He said that, there's a chance and there's a probability, in his words, that the United States is not speaking to a more reasonable regime. And certainly a lot of experts have said that the people who have come in to power now that are making these decisions are even more hard-lined than the people that they have been replacing. The president says that the administration, among others, is speaking to the Iranian parliamentary speaker, Kalibaf, but he is a former Revolutionary Guard commander. And he has publicly denied that these talks are taking place. What seems to be happening, what experts believe, is that there are these backdoor channels that are being utilized to have these conversations via Pakistan, but that direct negotiations aren't happening right now, and that the leadership in Iran is so fractured at this point because so many top leaders have been killed over the last month or so, and they're afraid to go out. They're afraid to meet together and to communicate because they could then be tracked and potentially killed either by the Israelis or by the U.S. military, that it's hard to get messaging and to have a cohesive message coming from Iran. So the big question for the United States is, the people you are dealing with, are those the people that actually have the power to make the decisions on behalf of all of Iran?
I'm going to go back to something you mentioned because there's a matter of concern, certainly here in Asia, about passage through the Strait of Hormuz. You mentioned, Mr. Hegseth, dodging the need to directly address or give a timeline on what happens through the Strait of Hormuz, telling allies to take a more active role in securing safe passage. But he's also said more vessels are flowing through the strait thanks to Donald Trump. If you could outline again for us what we have heard from this briefing on where the U.S. intends to take action on the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, Pete Hegseth said that that is not one of the main objectives of this mission. So, kind of, again, dodging this notion that the United States is going to step in and help to reopen this waterway that has only been shut down because of the February 28th strikes. And, the president put out this social media post earlier this morning, just about an hour ago, essentially telling countries that are running out of jet fuel to either buy it from the United States and to build up some courage and go take it themselves from the Strait of Hormuz, saying that the U.S. is not going to be there to help anymore. And Pete Hegseth talked about this in the meeting. He said, I agree with what the president said. This is not a waterway that the United States uses very frequently. It really should be an international coalition that is responsible for reopening the strategic waterway. But that post from the president comes after the Wall Street Journal has reported that the president is telling his administration that he is willing to pull out of Iran even if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. So perhaps starting to lay the groundwork for that in this message. Donald Trump has described Iran, and Pete Hegseth describing Iran today as well, as being completely decimated by these strikes that have been going on for 30 plus days now. But we see that the flames on this Kuwaiti oil vessel that was outside of Dubai, those flames were just being put out when the president is telling these countries to get some courage and go in there, that the United States has already done the heavy lifting to secure that waterway.
Oh, thanks. Toni Waterman there, breaking this press briefing down from the Defense Secretary and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Pete Hegseth and Dan Caine speaking. In fact, they have just this minute ago wrapped up that press briefing with a question and answer. Thanks. Toni Waterman reporting for CNA live from Washington, D.C.